Welcome to the Spirit School of Ministry podcast, where we discuss discipleship in your everyday life. Hi, everyone. Pastor David here with Pastor Bob Wilk and Liz Jones.
Hello.
And today we're talking about money. More money, more problems, right? Talking about it. It does create problems for the church to hear about money and how God wants your money so bad. Yes. No, God has so much money, right? He has so many resources.
Do they use money in heaven?
I don't know. I've never been there.
But, storing it up for him
who paid for those streets of gold?
Yeah, exactly. I guess they do have money. You just chip it off the street. You have as much as you need. As my wife says, he has the hill of 1,000 cattle.
Yes.
Right. And so, no, God has the cattle of 1,000 hills. So why does he care about our money? Why does he care about tithes and offerings? Because that's our subject today. Mm-hmm. Tithes and offerings. Yeah. Why does he care about that, Pastor Bob?
I have no idea why. Yeah. Yes. Well, this is, we're joking around about tithing and offerings and those things because most of the time when people approach this, they're so sad. You ever notice that? Like, oh no, they're talking about money. Oh my God.
Right,
it's like, for the love of God.
Literally, for the love of God.
Why is it important? Jesus put it together pretty simply. Hey, where your heart is, that's where your treasure's found. Sure. And so we have to understand that not only out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, but also the way we present ourselves to our world, our church, our family, whether or not we are the kind of people that are generous or greedy, it all comes out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, money's a pretty significant, important part of walking with God. We don't walk with God to serve money. Yeah. And that's the issue. I think most people, the problem they have is that they serve money rather than let it serve their needs. Yeah.
That's a good answer.
It is. Yeah. I remember John Piper said something really cool about how people serve money. And he said we were supposed to serve God the way people serve money. And it's not that they obey money like a slave. It's that they want more of it. And they do anything to get it. Oh. And they go after it with everything that's in them. And they'll make any sacrifice to get it, right? Because that's what's bringing them security and that's what's bringing them joy. So I'm going to steal that from him because I think it's a great thought. So
it is a great, well, hey, you can go right to the Old Testament, like the deer panting after the water. So my heart pants after God. That's that yearning. And people are like that. It's interesting how people are like that about money. Mm-hmm. Like they go crazy over money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think there's this kind of weird thing too, where the people like the church shouldn't talk about money. The church shouldn't have to deal with money. And it's like, well, maybe you should stop reading the Bible then, because there's so much in there about money and handling money, and even in the New Testament.
Wow. No, not in the New Testament.
Jesus, right? And he actually is correlating the care of the stewardship of money and finances, and then with the reward of actually stewarding cities, right? And stewarding people and nations. And so it's pretty impressive where he takes it, but definitely it's not something he shied away from.
No,
not at all.
So if you're faithful in the small, you'll be set over much.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's a great kingdom principle. But isn't this all Old Testament stuff, Liz?
Of course.
Like you mentioned the Old Testament.
Was Jesus in the Old Testament?
He was in the Old Testament. The whole Old Testament is about Jesus.
God? Jesus? No.
That's another podcast. That's a whole other podcast.
Jesus
it all ended back then, right?
Yeah, and this is one of the misconceptions about tithing, is that it's an Old Testament principle, that it's part of the law that Jesus came to abolish, which he didn't say he came to abolish the law. He said he came to fulfill it and actually bring us into a deeper relationship through that. So it's interesting, some of the misconceptions there. Yeah. I think we're going to explore some of this today. There definitely are Old Testament foundational principles about tithing, and we'll just talk about those for a minute here and how those translate.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about tithe, for people listening, it's sort of a Bible-ish word, so I'm not going to assume everybody knows that, but tithe just means the 10th. And so it's people bringing a 10th of their income, hopefully the first and fattest part of their income, like Abel in Genesis 4. He brought the best, he brought the first to God, showing his heart. But the 10% thing, I think that's part of the misconception, is that people see 10% as like the threshold and the ceiling of like, well, I gave my 10%.
Right.
And that could be an Old Testament view. But even then, I know I'm kind of rambling now, but the Old Testament, there was way more than 10%.
Yeah.
Because the temple worship, the Levites ran the temple, and they were supposed to take care of the sojourners, the widows, the orphans. And if you read through the Old Testament, we're not going to do the whole word study right now, but you'll find way more than one tithe. You'll find the first fruits. You'll find in every 7-year tithe for the poor. So they're giving way more than 10%. So if we're to say, oh, we're only giving 10, that doesn't even rise to the Old Testament standard.
Right.
Not even to mention the New Testament standard,
Right.
which is like, hey, if money has a grip on you, sell everything you have,
Right,
and give it to the poor.
Yeah. Well, and that is the interesting thing is like sometimes people can use Old Testament versus New Testament, and they're never in competition. It's always a completion. It's always a newer relationship with things in the New Testament, but it doesn't do away with Old Testament principles. And like you were saying, okay, Old Testament, people are like, that's the law, which we're going to talk about that. But that the 10%, okay, and I don't want to live under that. I don't want to live under that standard. Don't put that on me. All right. Well, what do you want to live? I'm in the New Testament church.
Right.
Well, what did they do? They brought everything. They brought everything they had together to the church and had it all in common. So it's like, what?
Are you allowed to say communists?
They understood that what they had was not theirs. They brought it for the work of the ministry to take care of other people, to have everything in common. They were not afraid to give their lives away, including their money. And so it's like, I don't want to live under the Old Testament standard. Well, then you're under the New Testament standard, which is everything you have belongs to the Lord. Right. Everything about your life is for Him and the church, because the church is the representation of the body of Christ in the earth. So saying you don't want to live under Old Testament standard is not going to actually justify you to hang on to anything.
Well, I think also people have a misconception of, in the Bible, what it talks about ownership, because when you came to Christ, think about this, your life's not your own.
Right.
It belongs to Him. You were bought with a price, paid for in full, right, by the precious blood of Jesus. He gave everything for you. People don't like to think about this because in our modern culture, we're all free, and at least here in America for now, I guess. But we're all free, and so I own my own life. But in reality, when you came to Jesus, He bought you. He bought you with everything. And so when you approach God and you approach the principle of tithing, not just a pattern that some New Testament church came up with, or some Old Testament guy did just to increase himself. It was actually God inspired, but it was inspired from the point of view of ownership. God owns us, and if we don't see it that way, we try to protect our lives. We try to hold on to our lives. In that process, we lose everything, actually. Yeah. And so there's a mindset of coming to God where, I've heard people say, he's asking for 10%, but actually he owns the 100%, and he's only asking for a portion of that from you. And, but he wants us to give it willingly. To yield it willingly. And those are heart issues. That gets into whole heart things that God is, and He's really interested in way beyond the money. He can get by without your money.
Right.
Fill with 1,000 cattle.
Yes.
He's got it all. He really does. I think it really is about the slavery of your heart towards material things. And it's about almost a poverty mindset. If you don't tithe, if you don't have a generous heart, I'm going to go old school right now. I'm going to go to the King James Version of Matthew 6:22 and 23. And it says this, the light of the body, this is Jesus talking, by the way. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that's in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? This is a concept called the evil eye. And it's all through the Old Testament. And it's about a stingy person. It's about somebody that you can't, if you're listening on audio, you can't see this, but it's a really, horrible expression of your eyes. You're just squinting. You're like,
David eyes.
You're like, who's gonna take this money from me? This is mine. Who's gonna rip it out of my hands? I gotta protect it. And it's this earthbound possessiveness and covetousness, where Jesus is saying, if the eye is good, if your treasure's in heaven, if you read on, if you're investing in the kingdom, you're going to see clearly in a way that somebody with a squinting evil eye could never see.
Yes.
You're going to see a kingdom perspective because you're acknowledging what Pastor Bob said, that everything you have is on loan. You're going to die. You're not going to take it with you. It's God's. You know, David said in Chronicles, we're only giving you back what you've given us,
Right.
Lord. So if we want to see clearly and we don't want to be enslaved to mammon,
Yes.
another King
James word.
we don't want to be enslaved to that. We have to give the Lord of our actual substance.
Yes.
Not just our conceptual giving. Oh, give
Right.
God praise. It has to become physical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's at stake here actually is that when you don't have the right concept of what we're talking about here, you actually start to go into those things that Pastor David was talking about, and which brings envy and jealousy, where greed, where you want everything around you. It's never enough. Mm-hmm. Everything, you want everything around you. And those things are actual idol worship. That's idolatry at its heart, and so covetousness is idolatry. It's not, it's forgetting who your God is and making another God, and that is mammon, money, whatever nice King James words you want to throw on him, but it's that covetousness. It's that envy of other people. It's seeing what other people have and want that, and want to take it from them. And, that's a major downfall for people, a sin. Are you allowed to use the S word here? Mm-hmm. Sin is okay. Okay. It's a major sin, and it drags a person down. Yeah. It's a brutal part of that exposes a part of our soul when we make money our God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or when we view ourselves as our provider also.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's another thing. I know a lot of times when the tithing subject comes up, it does put like a heaviness on people, because I know a lot of people feel like I never have enough. Yeah. I never have enough money. I'm working hard, and I can never, like now you're asking me, you're telling me I'm supposed to be giving more, I'm barely getting by. And so there is this whole faith component that comes into this. And it's not that the practical and faith are separated from each other. We walk out our faith in very practical ways. Right. And so some of that is what we're talking about today is like how you are actually handling dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. You can bring your faith into that, and you should bring your faith. Your faith is actually demonstrated through the very practical things that we do. Yeah. And so just speaking to people who are listening, because I know when this subject comes up, there's always condemnation that comes. There's like things that come on, heaviness that comes on people. And I'm just going to tell you, like, this is a supernatural thing that we're talking about today. Right. And the Lord can help you walk into this. Like, you're hearing it and you're like, I get it. Like, I need to give my life and I don't want to hold anything back, but I struggle with money. I struggle with having enough. I struggle with this. There is help. There are people that can help you get things in order in your life, because it really is about being in God's order. It is not about you needing to just give more and sacrifice, although there is sacrifice, but it's about coming into the order of God that releases his anointing in your life and releases his provision into your life, and where you don't have to be the source of providing for yourself. And that is the promise that he gives us in Malachi, is that as we bring our tithe to him and we bring to his storehouse, he pours out blessings upon us. So I just want to encourage you, if you're listening today, that this is something that you have to apprehend by faith. This is not something that you will logically step into. This is something you're like, all right, I'm hearing this. I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but I'm willing to take a step of faith. And look, if you need help walking into this, you need practical advice, like, reach out to us. Absolutely. We have people here who are so giving of their time to help people with their finances and help them in their faith journey, because that's always what it comes down to.
I love the way you said you equate it to it's supernatural, because a lot of people don't look at it that way. They just think it very natural, very, plain, very, it's money, it's stuff you hold on to. And in reality, most of the supernatural in Christendom spins around, miracle signs and wonders, healings,
right.
which it is, it's great. Also, provision.
That's right.
Provision is a miracle. It's not just something that, because if the word talks about this, David spoke about it. Hey, not that David, the guy in the Old Testament. We're going back to the Old Testament. But if it's not my hand that got me this, it's God that gave me that brought this into me. He's given me ability. He's given me power, and He's formed the increase that He's put on my life. I'm not going to say I did this, and because then I would be basically taking His name in vain and not making Him God. Yeah. Once again, it's idol worship, and by the way, the other side of that, those scriptures, make me not poor, so I don't steal from and which. Right. But if you're money oriented, right, that's the problem. You'll say either I got this. I made this. This was by my will and my abilities, or oh man, I'm always on the wrong end of the stick. Nobody ever does me right, so I have to steal. I have to do so. I have to go get it myself. Yeah. Either way, you're now in a realm where you're your provider, and the supernatural is not coming into play. You're not allowing God to provide for your life.
Yeah, there's a difference between saying that God's your provider and depending on God, even emotionally, and literally depending on God. Yeah. Throwing your dependence upon God. You give that first paycheck that you get from a job. You give that first of the month, whenever you pay your tithe, and you hope that the rest of the month is going to come through. And you have to depend on God. Mm-hmm. You put your money where your mouth was. You made your faith into flesh. And that's great for you spiritually. What you're really doing is you're gambling on God. It's like people are like, it doesn't make sense. How can I give 10 more percent? Like, you can't give 10 more percent. If you're just dividing up the pie of your income, there's not enough pie there. It's like, if you're a nerd, Keynesian economics versus supply side economics, right? You're either trying to divide the pie up, or you're like, this pie can expand. We can grow the supply. The Lord can open up the windows of heaven that Liz mentioned, so that you won't even be able to contain the abundance. By the way, He'll also rebuke the devourer that's rotting away your life. That's part of the promise as well. Exactly. But look at it as, I'm gambling on God because God's told me about a sure thing. He's told me that I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread. Right? And it's important to know that He's like, your needs, your daily bread will be provided if you walk in this path, right? If you come under this protection, if you come under this promise. It doesn't mean you're going to get rich. I think that could be something that's taught wrong about the tithe.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys want
to
take this away from me before I go off on it?
Believing that gain is godliness.
And we know that there's some really weird things, if we're just honest, that happen in Christianity regarding money. And there's some really weird things that are said about tithing, and you should tithe so that God will bless you. You should tithe so this will happen. You should, and it's like, no, you tithe because the Lord told you to do it. It's obedience, pure and simple, and it's worship. And that is part, it's like He's given you everything. If you really believe that He is allowing you to live, that everything you have is from Him, and He said, give me 10%. It's like, yes, sir, no problem. You'll take care of the rest, But we know, I'm sure we've all experienced, there's some weird things that happen with tithe. I remember I was in a service once, and the pastor got up and he said, you guys need to start tithing. And he's like, and if the Lord doesn't return it to you within 2 or 3 weeks, then write to me and I'll give you your money back. What? And I was like, what?
That's a pretty good deal. Usually you don't get that good of an offer from that.
I know.
Can you give me the address of that?
Yeah, I know. I was like, what in the world? So I give, and then if I don't see a return on my investment, then I have the right to take my money back. It's like, wow, that is what a weird, what a weird approach to something that is so simple. It's like, it's just simple. Give this portion to the Lord. Honor Him with the first fruits, like the best that you have. Bring it to Him first. Don't bring Him your leftovers. Don't bring Him if there's enough at the end. Bring it to Him first and trust Him. And it really comes down to that. And it's not a formula. It's not give so that you'll get, or sow in so you can reap back. Yes, we understand there's a scriptural principle, but sometimes it can get so twisted around. in this whole thing. And I get why people are turned off by the money subject in the church, because it gets into these really weird places, but it's never that. And if you always go back to the word, you will see actually the beauty in it and the hope in it and the simplicity in it. And it's not this weird twisted thing.
Now, you said a really strange word right in the middle of that.
Did I?
Which I want to bring to everyone's attention, but I'd also like maybe you two to comment on, and that is, you called tithing worship.
Yes.
Like, I didn't want that to pass by, because everybody knows worship is, on Sunday with the band. Right? I mean, that's worship, right? There's no other thing, right?
Yeah, we only do it on Sundays.
On Sunday for
From
Kayla, 1 hour, and that's worship, right? I mean, that's it. But you're saying now, you're telling me that tithing is worship.
Yes, I am saying that.
How is that?
Because worship is about obedience.
Yes.
Worship is about yielding. Worship is about coming into God's order. Worship is about bringing my life to Him. It has nothing, and maybe we'll talk about this on another podcast. I feel like we talk about this all the time, but worship is not singing songs. It is not dancing and, flashing banners. It's like, that's all praise and that's wonderful, and you can worship through that. But the biggest part of worship is what you do with your everyday life and what you do with what's in your hands. That is actually worship. And so obedience, right? Like the word said, is better than sacrifice. You can be like, I'm going to give my life to the Lord. All my life is about Him, and I'm involved in this ministry. I'm involved in that ministry, but I won't give my money. It's like, well, that's actually what He's asking you to do. That is worship. He says that's better than everything else you can give, is to be obedient to what He's saying.
Wow,
this you should have done without neglecting the others.
Right.
That's right.
Right. You brought everybody to the total deep end of the swimming pool and drowned everybody there just now. I don't know if you recognize that. Because now people are having a hard time. You upset their worship ideas.
I know. We'll mess them up later in another podcast about worship, because worship is
right, because God cares. I mean, it's not
does.
just that you give the money, it's how you give the money.
That's right.
That's your worship. It's not like there's plenty of other religions that aren't true that ask for a tithe.
Oh yeah,
we'll just leave it at
they
that.
do more than that.
And
actually.
so they'll actually garnish your wages and shame you and drive you out of the community.
Yeah.
But Jesus said, if you're offering your gift on the altar and you remember your brother has something against you,
right?
Not even something you did to your brother,
right?
But something they think you did against them. Go talk to them and make it right before you offer your gift. I think that gift could be the tithe. It could be offerings on top of the tithe. It could be your whole life savings you're giving to the poor, or whatever that is. How you give it is just as important as what you gave. Remember 1 Corinthians 13, it's like, hey, if I even deliver up my whole body to be burned as an offering, but I don't have love, it's nothing.
Pastor David, like I know that you heard a young lady preach in our service a couple of weeks ago. Somebody, we won't mention any names, but she was talking about somebody bringing what was supposed to be their offering. This guy Cain, and how you bring your offering. So there, you can like I'm tithing to God my way.
Yes,
that has some giant pitfalls. And for those who are just listening, I'm talking about the divine Liz here. She was preaching a message. Prophetess Liz. But yeah, go ahead. Expound a little on that, because I think it's really good, actually.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking about Cain, and he brought his offering to the Lord, right? Abel brought his, Cain brought his. And Cain, actually, he worked really hard. For his offering. He had to till the ground. You can go back and listen to the message, this whole thing about that.
Great message.
It's called what? The church taking action.
It was masterful.
Masterful. Thank you. But he put so much effort into what he brought the Lord, and the Lord was like, I don't want, that is not what I asked you for. And so contrasting there, sometimes we put a lot of effort into things and we're like, man, God is really going to be pleased with this because I'm working so hard at this. And this is like, yeah, I could bring him that, but this takes so much more of my time, and I'm better at this and I can do it this way. Right. And the Lord's like, that is not, just do what I asked you to do. Don't come to me with your ideas of how you're going to improve on what I asked you to do. Like, just do what I'm asking you to do. And the tithing thing is one of those things that's like, bring your tithes into the storehouse, bring it to the Levites, right? We can talk about some of the scriptures, like bring it to the church.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, I tithe this way.
My time.
You know,
I tithe my time.
I tithe my
only.
time. I give it to this Christian radio station. I give it to, this person. We bought this person dinner. That's my tithe. And it's like that, you should be generous. You should be generous and you should give. But there are scriptural principles about tithing, about bringing your tithe to the church, to the people of God for the support of the work of the ministry. Mm-hmm. And that is actually God's way. And we can get in our own ideas and decide that doesn't really matter. I'm going to do it my way. And then be wondering, why isn't God pleased with my tithe? Wow, that was harsh, huh?
That was a good one. Yeah, maybe they don't want to go listen to your message.
It's interesting.
You can all tune out at this point if you want to.
Because I looked up this morning in the message that passage that you're talking about, where Cain was not accepted. And God says, this is Gene Peterson's paraphrase, God spoke to Cain, why this tantrum? Why the sulking? If you do well, won't you be accepted? And God's like, hey, bring it in the right way. Don't get all upset, right? When you do it the wrong way in your own wisdom and things aren't working out for you and you feel like I'm robbing from you. That wasn't even the way that I asked you to do it. Right. So stop sulking. He kind of speaks to him as a little kid, And I thought that was a good
get over
paraphrase.
Yourself.
Yeah. And how many Christians approach tithing that way? They sulk about it. I had to give my hard-earned money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jesus didn't tithe to me. Because it says this in 2 Corinthians 8-9, chapter 8, verse 9. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich.
Yeah.
And I can never sulk giving to the Lord and his work, because he did not sulk giving himself for me.
Right.
Yes.
He literally didn't hold back any of his blood or his life or his spirit. He poured it all out. That's what God did. So for us as Christians, it's not us doing a work to please God and earn our acceptance with him. We know this, right? This is Gospel 101, right. Hopefully. God gave everything to accept us, apart from if we tithe or not. It's not how you get saved to tithe. It's not how you get the love of God. It's not how his joy comes into you. It's none of that. It's no type of earning. Every time money comes up, people are like, what do I have to do with my money? What's going to be good enough? And we forget, like I think someone mentioned earlier, but the Old Testament principle might have been the tithe, but the New Testament principle is the cross. It's the giving the whole self. Yeah. There's offerings on top of your tithe. There's whoever needs you, whoever needs mercy from you, you're obligated to give them whatever they ask, the Good Samaritan, and come back later and check on them to see if it's okay, to see if they're all right. It requires your whole life. Somebody wants to sue you and take something from you, you're supposed to give them more than they sued you for. This is the New Testament.
That's right. Yeah, and it's not about someone taking something from you. And I think that is a mindset too. And we can have that mindset in a lot of different ways in our ministry, in our time, in our soul currency, right? We feel like people are always taking from us. And that is in our money. Like the church just wants to take from me, or people just want to take from me. And it's like, that is so opposite of the model that Jesus laid out for us. I mean, he says, I lay down my life and no man takes it from me. Right? He wasn't like, these people are just taking my time and taking my ministry and taking my love and taking this and now they're taking my life. It's like, he's like, no one's taking that from me. I'm giving it generously. Right. I give it freely. And it's the same way for us. We have the opportunity to approach our life like people are always taking things from us and they want more from us. Or you can approach your life like Jesus did, like, no one takes anything from me. I give everything freely. Yeah. And when you walk in that frame of mind, from that perspective, it is a joy to give, and you can't give enough. You will never feel like anyone's taking anything from you because you're giving it before they can even ask.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a sad story when you, like I said, when you think you have ownership of that, because I like your story. It's such a strange one too, with the preacher saying, if it doesn't bless you in 2 weeks, I'll give it back. I'm like, well, imagine if God did that with Jesus. Hey, if this doesn't work out for us in a couple of weeks, I'm taking his sacrifice back. Or what about in the Old Testament? Oh, we're in Old Testament again. When they bring their offering and it's burnt up, there's no retrieving it after that. It's done, right? It's done. And so it's a complete relinquishing of your ownership. It's or what you perceive as your ownership, and it's giving to him. And it's and this is the other thing, there's a trust involved. And God's not he's not only focusing there on trusting him, which, a lot of people, I'm trusting God for this, and it's very ethereal many times. But also you're trusting the people that God put in your life to steward the money that you might be giving.
Yes.
And so there's it's easy to say, I trust God, well, guess what? He's up in heaven. I'm down here. I'm calling the shots down here. But trusting another person, like to believe that they are sent by God, that they are actually stewards of God and stewards of the money. It's not their money, because a lot of people believe when they give to a church that they think democracy. They think, oh yeah, I've got a say in this. I can vote on how it's going to be spent. I'm going to vote on, and if I don't like the way it's used, I'm taking it back. No, that's not how God does it. There's no do-overs, take-backs. He's like, you have to be fully vested, knowing where the supply comes from, knowing that he'll fully supply every need. Yeah.
I think you guys have both mentioned this principle of giving to the local church for your tithe. I think that's totally right. And I struggled with that for a while because of the New Testament concept of like, hey, I want to give, I'm willing to give. I want to give it where the Lord puts on my heart to give it. I want to see impact. I want to, right there, right? It's like you have an agenda for your giving instead of offering it as a sacrifice. But there's also the principle of 1 Corinthians 9 and other places where those that feed you spiritually should be the ones that you feed materially with your gift. Right. So it is biblical. And yes, on top of your tithe that supports the house of God and the people that feed you, there should be offerings to the poor. There should be offerings to missionaries. There should be helping people in need. That's right. It shouldn't be some sort of that's why we're here on earth, to give our lives away as Christians. We gave our lives to him. He bought us, as Pastor Bob said. So I do think that is an important thing. Not as a legalistic thing. Right. Like, wait, Pastor Bob, what happens if you only accidentally gave 9.8% to the church?
Oh, God, you're going straight to hell.
Yeah.
On that one, right down, straight, right into the pit, because now you're
down the highway.
You're down the highway, highway to hell. Get up on the highway.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the reality is, a person that's that kind of religious about it is checking boxes, right? So they've checked the 10% box or whatever in their culture they feel is right. And that's not worship. That's, it's the all that I am, all that I have, it's yours. It's my worship to you. It's, and so checking boxes never works well with God. It's just, it's not even, he wants our heart. He doesn't care, and that's why where your treasure is, that's where you'll,
I heard this quote once, and I do not remember who said it, but it stuck with me, is that if you're still measuring your sacrifice, you haven't seen his worth.
Wow.
And that's like, and again, I'm not talking about singing as worship. We're talking about my life as worship. And if I am still measuring out, well, I'm going to give this portion of this and this portion of this, and I can give about this much of my time, I can give about this much of my soul capital, my emotional well-being. It's like I have not really actually seen his worth in my life. I have not realized the greatness of his value, and that my life is not my own, like you were saying earlier, that I do not deserve to be breathing today. The only reason I am is because he has allowed me to live. And more importantly, he's brought my spirit back to life and given me life abundantly. And for that, like, what could you pay for that? What would be enough to give?
Right.
To even start to give back to him what he's given to us.
Even though the tithing principle is not strictly a law thing, everybody always goes, that's the law, it's the Levitical law. It actually obviously started before, way before it was God. I mean, it's in God, it's who he is. But it's interesting because even in the law, when he's presenting his tithing principle to a people now, like a people group, it happens with the Levites, who are the worshipers, by the way. That's where they're centered. And it's interesting, when I was thinking of tithing, I was thinking how the Lord looked at the Levites. He said that, and you can go read this, he said that they are my tenth. They're
Yes.
my tithe. It's like, so he's looking at lives. Like he's
Yes.
got and because they were given to him, he took them because he bought them. Mm-hmm. They were provided for completely.
Mm.
They were. And guess what?
Every way.
And the Levites also were commanded to give a tithe.
Yes.
And God said, I'll count your tithe, priest, pastor, apostle, prophet. I'll count it as if you earned it sweating in the field.
Right.
And so just for people listening that say, church leaders, have one standard and they get all of our money and they don't tithe. That's definitely not what you should be doing as a church leader. You need to be tithing your money as well as your time. And if anyone's listening and not doing that, you're just as accountable as people. And like Liz said, don't be measuring your sacrifice. But also, there's a bad way that church leaders measure other people's sacrifices.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you don't know the condition of the flock and you don't encourage people to tithe. You don't encourage them to be responsible. But it means you don't depend on the people's tithes. Just like the people don't depend on their income, you don't depend on people's tithes. You depend on God.
Right.
God is able to increase it. And so a lot of pastors and leaders are very stressed and almost very controlling in some senses, sometimes, not everyone, but over people's tithes. And they want to squeeze it all out and hopefully I'll get enough. And that's the same heart as the person that says, no, I work 9 to 5 and I can't tithe. So I just want to apply this evenly to leaders and pastors. And, it's not just quote unquote, the congregants. This is a word to me as a pastor.
Right.
It's hard for me to tithe every month. It's like, it's still an investment. It's still a work of faith. It's still a gamble in a sense, but I just know what's going to happen because I've been tithing for a while. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but it's going to try our hearts as well. And if we're not willing to walk that path, we really cannot nickel and dime people that we're trying to lead. Like we can't do
Absolutely. That. And I think you can tell that. I think you see the blessing of the Lord on churches where the leadership has understands that and is enjoying that worship. Yeah. I can speak for our church because I'm involved obviously at those levels that traditionally over all of our 50 plus years, our leaders in our church are the biggest tithers. Like they and willing, and not only with their money but their time and all those other things too. Amen. But they have always been that. It's not, and that's not propagated. Nobody would actually. Here I am saying it. Nobody would actually ever know that. I know that because I actually see it, and so I'm like, oh. So they're not raising their little flag going, oh yeah, I know you're tithing, but I do this. They won't do that. It's because it's in their heart. And that is, I think, the hallmark of a great church that, that understands the principle of tithing and understands that it's worship, that's bringing us to God, our whole life. And it's expressed sometimes in our money.
Yes. Yeah. I want to go back to something you said too, because I know this is a place where there's some misunderstanding about tithing being part of the law and how Jesus came to do away with that. You know, and it's like that's not why he came, but we'll get there. But
made it worse.
The first place that tithing, just go to the word. The first place that tithing is mentioned as a tenth is in Genesis 14, right? When it talks about Melchizedek and Abraham, which is 600 years or something prior to the giving of the law.
Right.
And there's this principle put in place, and Melchizedek is referred to as a type of Jesus, right? Yeah. He's a type of Jesus in the Old Testament, and Abraham obviously is a type of the church. Right, yes. Us being in Abraham, a new nation of Israel. Yes. And so right here in the very first book of the Bible, before the law, before Moses, before all of that, is this type of what is to be instituted in the earth and continue, is this picture of Abraham bringing a tenth to Melchizedek, not because it was a commandment, not because he was trying to check a box, because he was doing it out of honor for someone who had a position in his life that was worthy of that, of bringing in the tenth. And so that is actually the first place we see the word, tithe, the tenth used there in the Bible. Again, has nothing to do with the law. We do see it, right, obviously established in the law. We see it in the prophets. We see it in the New Testament when Jesus is addressing the Pharisees. He's not saying he's getting on them because they're tithing, yes, but they're neglecting people. And he doesn't say, you shouldn't be tithing, you should be doing this. He says, you should be doing both of those things. Right? So you shouldn't just tithe and neglect people. You should be doing all of those things in the right spirit toward the Lord. So Jesus did not abolish the tithe. He's just telling them there's more. He always comes to expand our understanding of how we live our life with the Lord. And that it's not, this was old, now you're moving into this. It's like, yes, this, bring it into the right perspective, and now let's expand it to the rest of your life.
Well, I think Jesus also, everything about his life, because he came out of eternity, is to give us an eternal perspective.
Yes.
And so he's bringing that. That's why when he said, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. I mean, he's bringing a fullness of it and what it really means, because like I said, people will want, in every area of life, we will tend to want to form religions and idols and things that we can control and put in a box, and God will not be put in a box. He will not be. They may try to, people will definitely try to, but he will not be mocked that way, and he will break out of your box, and ultimately you will have to face him. Like, I hate to bring that kind of thing, but that's the reality. You're going to have to, what did you do with what you had? I want to know what you did with what you had. That's where, when we come before him and we're showing him our full life tithe, like, what did we do with our life at, like I said, I hate to bring the whole judgment thing in, but hey, guess what? Apparently everybody goes there. I hate to, let's not talk about that thing, Bob. That's judgmental. Don't judge me, but the reality is sooner or later, everybody comes before God. And then what? Like, he's gonna want an account of what you did, what you had. And not just what, did I check the box, or I do the, did I put 10.2%? No, what did you do with your heart, and how you stewarded it, and how you managed it, and how you propagated it to other people around you? Because that's a whole nother thing. Don't let me go off on a tangent here. You guys reel me back in, because one of the worst things is when someone's having a problem with tithing, they then start to expound that false religion to people around them.
Yeah.
And they give them other alternatives. They give them false alternatives, and they drag down other people with them, rather than going, you know what? I'm struggling in my faith right now, and I'm, I don't know what to do. I can appreciate somebody going there and going, hey, this is rough. Look, we've all counseled people that have come to God, new people. And it's a shock, right? They come into God's like, what? I just thought it was, he's like, I get stuff, it's like, and so I've sat with people and told them, I've said, look, I understand this tithing thing is, it's outside of your, what your normal has been in life. Like, who does that? Where do you tithe in life, right? I don't know if I'm going to say anything about the government, but taskmasters. But the reality is, I've sat down and said, hey, you know what? Why don't you? I will explain to them the principle, everything we've started talking about tithing. But I said, why don't you start with showing God what faith you do have? Just bring to him, if you can only give $1 and you're a millionaire, if that's all you can do, why don't you start there? Why don't you just start someplace? Because there has to be a real tangible component of how people listening to this, how are they if they don't do it and they have weird ideas and wrong ideas, how do they start? Where do they start? Yeah. And we know that it's an expression of our faith. Yes. It's not, and so why would, you wouldn't say to somebody, okay, well, now you have to walk on water. It's like, no, you need to walk with God daily, and perchance he may actually have you walk on water someday. It would be awesome, right? But we don't go there. We walk people's faith into God. And so I think people listening to this, they have to understand, we're not sitting there going, okay, send us your 10% today. It's like, no, you need to understand the principle behind it. And then you need to bring your heart and your faith to it at where you're at and begin. Yeah. Just begin and see what God does. See how he increases. See how he looks at that little that mustard seed of faith and grows it in your life.
Yeah, to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. Yeah. So if all you have is a little bit of faith, give that and see the Lord, ask the Lord to increase it. Right. But it's important to develop a discipline of tithing. It's important that you
Yes.
build it into your life. It's easier when you're making $10 a month to start tithing than when you're making $10,000 a month.
Is it?
I think so. It doesn't hurt as much. And you're like, it doesn't look like as much.
I don't
It's
know.
hard to write a check.
I think if I only have
that much,
$10,
but
man, that $1 might
yeah.
feel like a hard thing to
maybe
give
like
away.
I'm thinking more of like a kid with a lemonade stand.
Oh,
It's
gotcha.
like, okay,
They don't have any
we're
bills.
starting off.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's important. I mean, yeah. Was it difficult for you guys at all to build like a habit of tithing? Was that something that you've just always done, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, that was something my parents instilled in us growing up, was that we tithed. So anytime we made money, even in like when our grandma would send us like birthday money, we tithed on it. It was just like how it was. So it wasn't like I didn't have the shock of like, oh my gosh, I have to start doing this. But there's always different times when it can become a faith struggle, right? Times when things
Absolutely.
are tighter, or when you're like, man, and you're looking at like, wow, that's a lot of money. You know, at the end of the year, you get your tithe record, and you're like, wow, you know, that could have come in handy if
I
you
could have
placed-
gone to Greece on that.
I could have gone a couple of times. But ultimately, it's like the thought of living without tithing for me now is like I have too much fear of the Lord, I guess. No, because I understand like this is it's his, and I do not want to rob him of that, because he does say if you're not giving, you are robbing of his portion, and it really is the small portion that he's asking of us. And so it's a faith thing. That's just what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's a faith thing.
For me, when I came to the Lord, it was different, but it wasn't hard. I think because he delivered me out of so much, I felt so indebted, a debt of love, right? Not like I had to pay my way, I felt like, I was his. And so I think, and different people come to the Lord different ways. And mine was like a major transformation, and it pulled out of all sorts of stuff in my life. And like I realized immediately, wow, my life really isn't my own. Like I wasn't, I wasn't planning all that, and all of a sudden I'm there. And I think that for me, it was a love expression. Yeah, a love expression. I guess that's the way it was. It seemed to come easy. I don't remember ever struggling with it. And I remember my wife and I first married, and like everybody else, you're young, you don't have money, you're doing, but it never, and with her also, it's never, in our home, it was never, oh, we got to do this or that. God's portion was his portion. Yeah. And it was, we're giving, and if you don't supply, oh well, we're still in you. We have, and so there's that heart toward it. It's a strange thing, but I think it's a hard thing for some people to come there.
Well, I'll say too, just in full transparency, the times when I have struggled, it's not been actually with the give, like the amount I'm giving or the giving itself. It's actually been like forgetting to write the check actually is where it's been like more of an organization thing, and like and then realizing like, oh my gosh, this time has gone by and I didn't do that, and then I'm behind, and then just being fully transparent here. But and so I had to set up systems in my life now where it's like that's just automatically what happens twice a month is and that was like people are like, well, you're not bringing your first fruit. I'm like, well, I am. I have this servant called AutoPay.
I send him with the money.
Like this is like, and it's, for me, it's a very practical thing, but it is part of my faith walk is like just getting my things in order so that I can make sure that the Lord is getting his portion before at the beginning, every time I get paid something, the amount comes out because it's important to me. And so that was just a very practical thing that I had to learn.
Liz, that's a really important practical thing that you just said. That I don't want it to be missed on some people, and that is if you wait till the end to see if there's 10% left over, it's much tougher, right? And it's your natural mind comes into play. Now your fate's really challenged. Whereas if that's the first thing you're giving, then the rest of it you have to work out. You have to make it, you have to steward it well, you have to deal with it well. And it's the next thing. It's not the first thing. And so I think that's a really practical thing, because most people look and go, wow, I have 15% of bills left over, and now where do I come up with that for God? And
well, that's where you start to see cool stuff, like when you're giving before you know you're going to have something, or when you're giving and you don't have it. And you're, I would just say, like, it is hard. It's a strange paradox for me, because it's always hard to give because you see it coming out, but it's always at the same time blessed, and it's always confident. It's like a hard thing that I'm confident about. Yeah. It's a strange paradox, because so many times I've given even when I didn't see how it was going to work out. Just one personal thing I'll share with you guys, and anyone listening. It's not to draw attention. It's just because I think it'll bless you as well. But the first check I get at any job or at any new source of income, I give the whole thing to the Lord. And he's always provided so much more down the line. That's in addition to other tithes and offerings. Just giving it as a sign of, Lord, you're the one who brought this in my life. I didn't provide this. So you're real. Because God is real.
He is.
You can put your money in him. You can put your gamble in him. You can put your investment, your faith, and your hope in him. And it's been crazy. I could tell testimonies of how God provided, and people told me not to do it a few times, and I did it anyway. And it worked out great, because God sees it, and he sees the heart. Now, maybe you should get counsel before you do that. I'll just hedge my bets, whatever. Well, God told me to do that. So
you're not proposing that as the religion of tithing.
No,
this is how you do it. I think Pastor David's expressing to everybody very openly this, not to brag on it or anything, but this is what he's done. Now, if somebody runs off and goes, I'm going to go do what Pastor David did, that's probably not the best way to start, right? Because now you're trying to mimic somebody rather than please God.
Right.
And so God, that was a very personal thing that God put on you. And he may have done similar things to all of us, and, and that's our personal thing with God. But like you said, then the tithe is also something you did intentionally afterward.
Yeah. And just using systems, like Liz said, to make sure that it's reliable, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to pass through your hands. It's like you've made that commitment, and you're like, that's the Lord's. I don't even see it. I don't even touch it, because he has a super abundance of provision and grace. So
yeah. Well, I just want to just to read a scripture out of the New Testament about giving. It says that each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And again, just bringing this back to, this is something between you and the Lord. Yeah. This is something that it's a position of your heart to the Lord. And if you're giving out of reluctance or because you feel obligated, keep giving, just change your heart.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
Sometimes people will say, well, I'm not giving cheerfully, so I should stop giving. No, you should repent. I should repent. But this is something that the Lord, it's so personal between you and the Lord. Yeah. This is, yes, it has ramifications on the church and people and giving to them, but this is the love story between you and the Lord. It's like what we have is ours, and I don't want to hold anything back from you, and it's my honor and my joy to give.
That's so good.
It's not a cliche, but you cannot outgive the Lord.
It's so true.
It is true. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up our podcast, just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Yeah. And we're not going to ask you for money. I know maybe you thought we would at the end of that podcast, but we are gonna encourage you.
Send it to P.O.
We're just so thankful that you joined us, and we remind you of the giving nature of Jesus. Yeah. And I just want to conclude with that whatever you need of him, he's not reluctant, and he is a cheerful giver to you. And just go to him and ask him, and he will provide all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. We don't serve a poor God. We serve a God who's abundant in riches and true riches. And if you need mercy, if you need grace to help, this is the time of need. Go to the Lord, and he's willing to bless you and provide for you. And he's just looking for your heart and your trust. So please join us next time. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episode. And for more information, visit spiritschoolofministry.com.